Washington's search for help along the offensive line continues.
You are Locked On Huskies, your daily podcast on the Washington Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back into another edition of the Locked On Huskies podcast. I'm Roman Tomashoff. That's Lars Hanson. He's site editor with Athlon Sports' Inside the Huskies. I'm the site editor with Huskies Wire. Thank you for making this your first watch or first listen of the day, as we are part of the Locked On Podcast Network. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 with any winning $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. So, Lars, some interesting movement along the offensive line, where there have been a couple of offers over the last couple of days, one to a 2024 recruit who I know we'll get into. One guy who I know both you and I are really interested in is junior college All-American Maximus McCree. And he's somebody that took a really, really interesting journey, where he's a two-time junior college All-American out of Iowa Central College, spent a year at Maryland with the Terps, then went back to the junior college ranks, where it looked like he just didn't play enough. He only played in 2 games with the Terps in 2022. And now, I mean, just with some of the other offers he's getting, I would call Washington the favorite to land his commitment.
Yeah, it was a really weird research project to
yeah,
see
right.
what his case was, because what was interesting was he signed with Maryland out of junior college, to your point. And I was looking at it, I'm like, wait, what class is he in? 2019, 2020? Is this like a 10th year junior? Is this that MLB player that's now going back to college after like 10 years? Or what's the case here? Because when you look at his film and when you look at how he projects with 3 years of eligibility left, that's exactly what Washington needs. That's what I wrote on Athlon Sports, where Washington would ideally like that, graduate transfer, whatever, but having a guy who can come in potentially and start for multiple years, that to me is actually more beneficial than getting a one-off grad transfer, because you need stability at that position, and it doesn't necessarily hinder Elijah Jaquette and some of those younger players from still coming along. But he's got a really nice frame. He moves really well from the clips that I've seen. Without question, a left tackle. I don't think there's any question about that. And just to be clear about that, and I think that's also why it's a perfect fit, because when we looked at some of the other options that they were looking at, it was a right tackle converting to left tackle, or a right tackle that had kind of played some left tackle or maybe some guard or whatever. Chris Adams obviously, played some mostly right tackle before switching to left. This one is a true just stay on the left side. You're plugging and playing for at least 2 years.
So I'm glad you mentioned Chris Adams, because one thing that stands out is he's got a similar frame at 6'6", 285, which is exactly what Chris Adams had measured in at. But one of the things that I noticed is just the difference in frame, where Chris Adams kind of seemed like he was already filled out. And then we look at Elijah Jaquette and Sione Fasolo, they're nowhere near filled out. He's kind of in the middle, where there's still a lot of room that he can continue to grow and add some weight and some muscle to his frame, which is a good thing. And then on top of that, it's not like, one of the things that I feel we saw both Fasolo and Jaquette struggle with over the course of spring practice was, there are certainly still some technique things that needed to come along, but was physicality. And a lot of that came from them not being fully physically developed yet, in terms of, they can add a lot of muscle in their legs, especially. And that's something with McCree where that's not the case at all, where he's gotten some time in the Big Ten. We know that, even though he didn't hang around over there, that he has some of that experience, which is nice, practicing against players in that system for a full season. And then at Iowa Central, he was able to stand out. He was able to be one of the better players in the junior college ranks. And this is something where, and it's weird to say this, but you don't need for him to come in and be a star. And I say that because we've seen some really good left tackles over the last handful of seasons. When you think about Trey Adams, when you think about Troy Fautanu, when you think about Jackson Kirkland. So Washington has a fairly good history of left tackles playing well in recent memory. And I mean, if you want to go all the way back to Lincoln Kennedy, of course you can. But with McCree, he just needs to be okay. That's it. If he can stand in there and give Will Rogers 2.5, 3 seconds, and he doesn't need to be just a standout lockdown All-American like Trey Fautanu was, then this is going to be a good thing, because you look at guard Memelar, who you and I both project to come back for the fall. You look around the rest of the offensive line with Drew as a party, as long as it can be solid. It does not need to be elite, but if it can be solid, this team truly does have a shot to be 8-4, 9-3.
Yeah, and if you think about UW does have success in somewhat recent history with junior college offensive linemen for Luciano. Now, granted, that was a
Yep.
center, converted tight end to center and things like that.
But
But
still,
we've seen it. But we've seen it work. And again, there's obviously much different coaching staff. But the reason I bring that up is you're honest. When Corey Luciano came in, and even in that second year that he was in the program after he made the move over to offensive line, like to center, he was good enough. He didn't
yeah,
wow anybody, right? He wasn't a Jackson Powers Johnson first team All-American, things like that. But what is he doing right now? He's in the
playing
NFL.
in the
He's
NFL.
playing
Yeah.
on Sundays. And that's really all that matters. And when you look at exactly what you said, his frame, McCree's frame, perfectly fits that mold of an athletic tackle for an offense that wants to just go quick. Not quick in terms of a fast pace like the Oregon offensive mold under Chip Kelly, but in that mold of, hey, we want to do some pulling, we want to do some spread stuff, and get receivers the ball in space, and we need you to pull. Like the first 5 or 6 clips that he had in his most recent film was of that outside movement. And the funniest part about watching his film for me, you saw him just like escort this defensive end
Yeah.
and just out of the play. And
I know which player you're talking about too. Yeah.
The ball on the run is going to the right, and McCree is just wanting somebody over on the left-hand side here.
So those are always my favorite plays, because one guy who, and this is a very unique example, but one guy who always did that so well and was so good at that in his high school film, because that's what, this lower level of competition film is supposed to be, being physically dominant for the most part, where, yeah, you're seeing these guys who aren't nearly in the same just stature as you for the most part, was Roger Rosengarten, where he would just pick guys up and carry them off the field and just put them in the dirt on every single play, which was always really funny to see. But Lars, I wanted to spend 60 seconds on somebody else, and that's 4-star offensive lineman Malachi Goodman, who's part of the class of 2025, that is from New Jersey and recently received an offer on the Huskies, or from the Huskies. And this is somebody who's got a whole bunch of really stellar offers scheduled to visit Alabama, visit Auburn, visit Georgia, visit Penn State, I believe, is on there as well. So he's got a whole bunch of really, really nice offers, and Washington's coming in late, but I feel like there might be some interest there.
It does seem like there is interest there. No pun intended, in the sense of obvious, just because, well, he gets an offer. Washington's not going to go out all the way to the East Coast to make an offer to a kid that truly doesn't have interest. The one thing that is important, and I wrote this in my story on Athlon Sports, college football recruits can now take unlimited visits. It used to be a few years ago, you could only get 5, and with the 5 that he's scheduled right now, that would be it. He would make his commitment in June, and maybe if the coach he committed to got fired or something happened, he could potentially take visits. Now it's a case of, well, that's a given. If your coach gets fired, you can take another visit to a same school that you committed to or visited prior, as long as there's a coaching change. But that's what this tells me. When you look at the way they're recruiting offensive linemen, it's another 4-star tackle or 4-star prospect, interior lineman, which you pair that with Douglas Uchu, a top 5 lineman, that is exactly what we're talking about, needing to develop consistently year in and year out. And as we've talked about on the show, there isn't necessarily a ton. There is obviously the U2s and Mills and a couple other guys on the West Coast, but sometimes you got to go to the East Coast and go to the Midwest to find some of these linemen. And so it's promising that they're going all the way out to New Jersey, just like they're going all the way out to Florida. We saw, Vinny Sinceri, pose with Ladarius Clarity in Florida. So it's like these coaches are putting all this work in, and that was why Jedd Fisch, when you give him the resources, he can deliver. And we're starting to see the fruits of that labor now.
Lars, and speaking of taking unlimited visits, Zaydrius Rainey-Sale added a couple to his schedule. And we'll get that right after a message from our good friends over at FanDuel, because it's winner take all time in the NBA and NHL. And FanDuel is giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and more. You can visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make every playoff shot count. FanDuel is America's #1 sportsbook. And I know it's not looking good for the Minnesota Timberwolves. It was something where when they were up 2-0, looked pretty nice, and I feel like our dreams of a Celtics Timberwolves final might be getting pretty close to dead there, but hey, it's not over yet. So Lars, Zaydrius Rainey-Sale, the top recruit in the state of Washington and one-time Husky commit, has added a couple visits to his list where he was originally set to take 4, and that was UCLA, Oregon State, Florida State, and Washington. He's now added 2 more and changed his Washington visit, which I feel is really interesting. So his full schedule, according to Brandon Huffman from 247 Sports, is he'll start at UCLA on May 17th. Then he's got Cal on May 23rd. Oregon State on May 31st, Florida State June 14th, Oklahoma on June 18th, and Washington on June 21st. And this is significant for many reasons. You know, we've talked about him as a commit before on the show. We've talked about what he would mean to the program if he were to commit again on this show. But changing Washington to the last visit could be a bad thing because, you know, you obviously, especially probably Florida State and Oklahoma, are not going to want to let him get off campus. But getting to leave a lasting impression is such a great thing too, that having him be the final, having Washington be his final visit is also a really promising sign.
Yeah, that it's a double-edged sword where we saw that both in the transfer portal and with other recruits where you can get them on campus and they can be all in on the Huskies, but if you let them leave campus, you never know what can happen then, especially if they take other visits. So it does necessarily, in one sense, work out for Washington where you can get him in on that last weekend in June, get him around a number of, you know, both committed and uncommitted prospects, because when you look at that final weekend, that was the same weekend that Anquan Fagans is coming in, and Hayden Lowe is coming in, Darius Afalava. There's a number, and then current UW commit, Jalen McMillan is also going to be on that visit. So you look at that list and think, okay, there's a ton of talent, but at the other side of this coin is when he was originally scheduled to come in, I believe he was at one time the only visitor scheduled for the weekend he was supposed to come in for.
Yeah,
which would have allowed the staff to have ample opportunity to just be around him, build all those connections up. And not that they don't have that now, but adding in another dozen or so visitors to a weekend where you were just going to focus on Zaydrius Rainey-Sale does change the complexity a little bit, because now you're going to have Mark Hanacor on campus. You're going to have Hayden Lowe and some of these other linebackers and defenders. And on one hand, that could say, hey, let's all team up together. On the other hand, that could say, oh, well, they're prioritizing this guy. Do I really fit here? And so it can go both ways. I do think, though, in the end, it does help because you get that last visit, you get the last impression. Goes into a dead period of sorts in the summer where he won't take visits in July or anything like that. So it becomes, does he wait until June, July, or, you know, end of June to make that decision? Or does he actually stretch it into the season, potentially commit at the Army All-American game in December or January?
So one name that you mentioned right there, 4-star linebacker, Mark Hanacor, I'm really glad you brought that up because those two have been just, you know, they've been united in messaging on social media for a while now, along with 4-star edge rusher Chinito Onyegoro, where Hanacor and Onyegoro have talked about playing at the same place for a long time, or at least publicly they have. I'm sure those conversations have gone on in private as well. And now Hanacor and Zaydrius Rainey-Sale are having similar conversations. And just seeing it in the public eye is one thing. Going on behind closed doors is a whole different thing. But seeing that and knowing that Hanacor especially is somebody who's been really, really high on Washington for a while, getting even 2 of those 3 4-star defenders in the building would be a huge win for Jedd Fisch's coaching staff as they're trying to build up just a strong base and a strong class of guys that can potentially commit next year, but also just highly ranked projectable bodies who can do a whole lot of different things for you, which is really exciting. And speaking of different things, Lars, somebody that would really just add another layer to Washington's offense is Arizona State wide receiver Elijhah Badger. We talked about him the other day, and today he's finishing up his official visit with Florida, which is his final one, and he's released his top 3 schools. It's down to Washington, it's down to Arizona, and it's down to Florida, and he's deciding on Friday. And this is one that I know you and I will be watching very closely because we've talked about the impact that he could have if he committed. And I feel it's worth rehashing that debate because, yeah, you know, that there could be better allocation of other scholarships, or I don't want to say better, but there could just be, you know, different allocations where do you want to bring in another scholarship offensive lineman, depending on who you can find in the portal. You definitely have to bring in a quarterback. Do you want to look at another position too? But getting Elijhah Badger, it would just mean so much for this offense.
Yeah, the more I think about it, the more you can really see why this is why they want to go and get somebody else in the portal in a skill position, especially a receiver, because we talked about it where you get Kevin Green Jr. from Arizona, but these are all kind of additions that don't preclude another one. This doesn't, take away. Think of it like Jordan Washington, right? You get Jordan Washington, that doesn't preclude you from taking a second running back in 2025. You're just getting the right amount of talent. And I mean, you said it best. The one thing Jedd Fisch is not going to do is turn down talent. Now, does that mean now, to be fair, on the other side of that coin, the talent can then say, well, where are my best use? Is my best opportunity in Badger's case in Florida or at Arizona or at Washington?
Sure.
All three do, I would say, provide unique cases to be made for all three. That said, the ironic part is it's almost like Jedd Fisch helped build two of those arguments. And the other argument that, he's obviously not a play caller in any sense, but a former UW coach being down in Gainesville, I'm not sure necessarily if Elijhah Badger wants to, test his water all the way out there. But you get to play in the SEC, you get to play in Florida. I'm sure, from an NIL perspective, he would be more than taken care of in that regard. So it comes down to which one provides him the best fit. When you look at the room at Washington, I think he would perfectly round out that room. He does something a little bit different, bigger than Giles Jackson, faster than Jeremiah Hunter, doesn't have necessarily I don't want to say style, because they do play with some of a similar style, but Jeremiah Hunter and him are two different receivers. Getting him with Denzel Boston and putting that trio together would still not you can still have Giles Jackson in the slot. You still can develop Keith Reynolds and Rashid Williams and all the other younger players. And if you think about it, this really is a one-year rental. So you're expecting Badger to come in, go for another 800 yards plus, add 5 or so touchdowns, really help shore up the offense. And that's also why you put that scholarship at receiver instead of a third left tackle or a third offensive lineman, because which one are you going to get more out of in 2024?
Yeah,
I think Badger.
Absolutely. And that's one of the big things about it. And one other guy that we wanted to mention really quickly is 3-star cornerback LaRue Zamorano, who cut his list down. He's down to 7 schools now. And he's somebody who Washington's been really interested in a while. And I went back and I rewatched his film this morning as I was writing something for him about him over on Huskies Wire. And I really like what I saw. He's somebody who plays with a lot of the flexibility that I feel they're looking for in the defense, where he's a really good tackler. That was the first thing that really jumped out to me. He's got really nice instincts, really nice ball skills. And he's somebody who I could believe can play outside or he can play safety. One of the two. I feel that both those are very possible for him. And he's somebody where I don't know if he's necessarily priority 1 or 2 right now on Washington's cornerback list. And I mean that as no slight to him, because there's some other names that they're looking at, where you look at Dijon Lee, Anquan Fagans at safety, as you said, LaDarian Clarity at safety, who you mentioned earlier. And then at corner, there's also Darius Dixon. There are so many other names. Adonis Curry is another guy who's coming in for an official visit. Rylon Dillard-Allen at safety, who just literally, as we're recording this show, announced that he's going to be decommitting from Arizona State, and is somebody that Washington is very, very high on and has an official visit set with him as well. So there are a whole lot of guys that might be ahead of him in terms of priorities on the list, but he's a really talented player. And when you watch his film, it's very clear why John Richardson is high on him and wants to make sure that they got him up here on an official visit, where he's going to be coming in on June 21st, and is somebody who would be a really great addition as, the 4th member of a class, or maybe he's the first guy to commit, but ends up as the lowest ranked member of the 4, to somebody where, in 2026, we're talking about him as, oh, hey, this guy's been really, really impressive in spring camp. That is, if he were to commit to Washington.
Right. And that's the thing, is I think having all that depth in terms of in the class, when you look at, that's why you want to cover your bases, because let's say Dijon Lee decides to go elsewhere. Okay. You want to have those other guys already in the fold with those relationships. You don't want to be reacting, because we've seen different staffs at Washington kind of struggle in that regard, where, hey, you have your top targets, but let's say for whatever reason, you just don't get them, miss on them, they choose to go elsewhere. You're left scrambling. You get a good prospect here where it doesn't necessarily provide the immediate upside in terms of maybe playing as a freshman, but does have that Sidney Jones type, that size, where you can play him 2-3 years down the line and have him be an impact guy that grows, especially with a coach like John Richardson. I trust him over a lot of other coaches when it comes to evaluating defensive back ability and saying, okay, you know what? Obviously, you're not the level of player X and Y, but I believe you can become that and even better in a couple of years at Washington.
Absolutely. And Lars, that being said, speaking of guys that are getting better, we're gonna have some fun and make some extra bold predictions today. Right after message from our good friends over at LinkedIn, because you know that whenever we talk recruiting, we got to talk about the best recruiting site in the industry, and that's LinkedIn, because when you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role. That's why you can check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs is a tool to help find all the right professionals for your team faster and for free, because LinkedIn isn't just another job board. LinkedIn helps you hire professionals you can't find anywhere else, even those who aren't actively searching for a new job, but might be open to the perfect role. In any given month, over 70% of LinkedIn users don't visit other leading job sites. So if you're not looking on LinkedIn, you're looking in the wrong place. On LinkedIn, 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. You can hire professionals like a professional on LinkedIn, because LinkedIn knows that small businesses are wearing so many hats and might not have the time or resources to hire. And that's why 2.5 million small businesses use LinkedIn for hiring. You can post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockdowncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockdowncollege. Post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Okay, Lars, the everydayers, they know we love our bold predictions on this show. And with Washington's 10-person draft class, there were a lot of extra talented members. And I say 10-person draft class, but just keep an eye on some other guys that are going to be around. We're going to be predicting which non-first round pick from the University of Washington would be our personal favorite to win Rookie of the Year. And I'm not going to take Ja'Lynn Polk in this one, because I've talked enough about him. So if you want to go that way, please feel free. If you want to go somewhere else, please feel free to do that as well.
Yeah, I mean, well, the only thing is, when you do start to look at the potential options, while there are some, there's not an endless list, especially with the caveat being not first rounders, right? Because the easiest one here is Rome Odunze or Michael Penix, which are off the board.
Absolutely.
Because so that just to be clear for everybody. But you're right. I mean, the reason why I'm going to go with Ja'Lynn Polk here is because he could have been, and arguably should have been, a late first round pick, where he had been mocked in the late 30s, or low 30s to the high 20s towards the last couple of months before the draft. But a lot of that is going to have to do, I think, with how much can his connection with Drake May get going early on. It could be a fruitful one in terms of, hey, they're just going to let Drake May ride it out and build up that connection, or does Ja'Lynn Polk have to work through some things? But I think the thing about his game is ultimately that won't matter, because he will get open for any quarterback. He is going to make quarterbacks better. But in terms of the overall numbers, how many targets does he get, things like that, that might be why that quarterback situation doesn't foster a Rookie of the Year type discussion. But I do think he's going to be one of those guys at the end of the year that we're going to say, wow, how is he not a first round pick? We look at all these other wide receivers that were in the first round. I think some of them might turn out to be more question marks than Ja'Lynn Polk.
I couldn't agree with you more there. And that's why I wanted to go with Jalen McMillan here, where I'm going to give a shout out to another Washington guy who should have won Offensive Rookie of the Year last year, but it always goes to a quarterback, and CJ Stroud was fantastic. Don't want to take anything away from him there. And that's Jalen McMillan, where between Mike Evans and Chris Godwin and Cade Otton, hey, another Washington shout out there, Jalen McMillan is going to have a lot of single coverage. And he's going to be asked to do a lot of different things, where I can't remember who was saying this, but there some member of the national media was saying, okay, now that, Puka Nacua has gone out and done everything that he's done, everybody's going to be looking for the next Puka Nacua. And I feel that Jalen McMillan might be in the perfect situation to be utilized as the next Puka Nacua, where if, Mike Evans or Chris Godwin has to miss some time with injury, which has certainly happened in the past, he has to step into that wide receiver 2 role and just become a target vacuum, which is something he can still certainly do for Baker Mayfield as wide receiver 3. But it just feels like with those two guys, he is going to see a lot of open space. And if he can become a guy who's getting 5, 6, 7 catches a game, which does certainly feel like a lot, but with what we've seen from him over his time at Washington and what we know his strengths are, he can play to all those strengths with the Buccaneers, which I think is really, really fun. And it's something where, hey, sometimes all it takes is just setting records with a couple of touchdowns, where if it's all of a sudden, oh yeah, he's become the go-to guy inside the 10-yard line, where no, he's not going to be dominant on fade balls or anything, but he pulls down 8, 9, 10 touchdowns. all of a sudden this is a guy whose numbers on FanDuel are going to fly way up in terms of just rookie of the year odds.
I'm glad you perfect segue for that, because I believe Polk has, I think, the best odds of any Husky not named Michael Penix or Roma Dunze. But
Right.
Jalen McMillan is up there. And I think that's the important thing to consider, where yes, he was drafted in the 3rd round, but had it not been for that injury, he's a 2nd round pick at best. And I mean, I know we both kind of slightly disagree where maybe he could have worked into that. I'm starting to talk myself back off that ledge, but not because not in this class, and that's the problem. But when you look at the potential that he could have, there's no doubt that he's going to have production in Tampa, because when you look at, I think is also, now this could be offensive rookie of the year, just overall rookie of the year, but whatever you want to call it, where if Jalen McMillan gets some chance to do some punt returns, that could also help his cause as well. Where Ja'Lynn Polk doesn't necessarily have that in his arsenal. I would be kind of curious to see if Ja'Lynn Polk could manage that, because I think he's got like interesting vision. He just doesn't have the speed for it and some of the other intangibles, but he's also tough, so he could handle those hits that come with it. So I think for that reason, I can see why McMillan might edge him out. But the one thing to consider is both of these guys, regardless, this rookie season is only going to be kind of that building block to what's to come for them. Because when you look at all of these guys, where first of all, let's go on the defensive side. When you think about obviously Eddie Lafushio won't be a high pick, shall we say, for defensive rookie of the year. But
sure.
We should probably pick maybe one other rookie that on the other side of the ball that will stand out, because I think Eddie's going to make an impression in Buffalo, and there's plenty of guys that necessarily won't have that rookie of the year, the high caliber, but are end up going to be playing 5, 6, 7, 8+ years in the league, and that's where they're actually going to shine.
So I'm glad you mentioned that, because I wanted to give a shout out to Dominique Hampton, because he's a really, really good fit for what Dan Quinn wants to run defensively. We saw what he's able to do with Cam Chancellor over his time in Seattle, where I don't want to say that that's the comp that I'm giving, but it's the role that Dom can be used in, which I really like. I think he can do really great things with that in Washington. But I did have a sleeper pick, and that's Dillon Johnson, where I know I'm back on the offensive side here, but that was honestly, when we talked about this and we decided to do this segment, that was the whole reason I wanted to do this, was because I wanted to get some time to talk about Dillon Johnson, because I love the fit of him signing with Tennessee Titans, where we know he was an undrafted free agent. We know he probably shouldn't have tested, did anyway, just, when he was recovering from all the injuries that he suffered over the course of the end of the season, between the broken foot, the high ankle sprain, and everything else that was going on with his knee and whatever else, that it all hampered his draft stock, and it ended with him being undrafted. But I love this fit in Tennessee nonetheless, where they're moving on from Derrick Henry. They signed Tony Pollard to an interesting deal. They have Tajee Spears, who I know they like. They have On Haskins, he's not bad either, but they don't really have just the bruiser that Dillon Johnson is, in my opinion. Where I know I just listed off just everybody ahead of him on the depth chart, but I don't know. I just feel like there's an opportunity there for him to climb and him to find a way to certainly not turn into Derrick Henry. Let's be real. That's not what I'm saying here at all. But where he can take a heavy workload, and it's something where sometimes the volume will certainly help that. And he's somebody where, if you're a dynasty fantasy football player like me, or if you're somebody you're getting into week 4, week 5, week 6, and who's a guy who's been, surprisingly effective, Dillon Johnson can certainly be one of those guys, in my opinion, just based off where he is, what the team's plan is going to be, and how he could be utilized there.
You know who also comes to mind when you say that? Devin Culp.
Who? Oh, okay. Yeah.
That one to me just screams like it won't be a consistent fantasy point guy, but I would not be surprised if he had like a 2-touchdown, 20-yard performance. The key plays where he's not going to be a 5, 6, 7 target a game type of tight end. But for what Tampa Bay is going to ask their tight ends, or what they do ask their tight ends to do, and what they're going to ask Devin to do, to me, he's a guy where I would not be surprised if he has a couple of touchdowns as a rookie, just because he always seems to, and this is what he did towards the end of his career so well, he always found a way to find a spot in the end zone. somehow, some way. And with Baker being able to run, Baker's going to be able to look and find him. So I think somebody in that offense is going to allow him to be open on a couple of touchdown drives this fall. So obviously not a rookie of the year guy. I'm not saying he's Travis Kelce or anything like that, but Devin Culp could also still surprise some people as a rookie. So it's worth acknowledging that as well.
Oh, absolutely. And one of the coolest things about that is the fact that he gets to reunite with Cade Otton. And we know that Jason Light just loves taking Huskies and has basically just built a Husky team and then a couple of other guys. No, that's really fun. And I like that a lot because seeing those two guys reunited was something that, could have been really promising under a non-John Donovan offensive scheme. But we don't need to go down that rabbit hole because that is its whole other podcast. And Lars, with that being said, thank you so much for being here. Thank you to all the videos for tuning in. We really do appreciate your constant support. We've got so much more fun stuff coming throughout the offseason. We are going to be doing a mailbag episode for our Monday show. So if you got any questions that you want to just answer, you can tweet them at either of us. You can drop them right down here in the comment section on YouTube. Wherever you follow us, make sure to send us all your questions because we want to make sure we can answer everything just surrounding the offseason. You got draft questions, recruiting stuff, anything like that. Make sure you send them all to us and subscribe wherever you get your podcast, whether that's YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music. We're there. We're everywhere. We're updating the channel with new content every single day. So make sure you click the like on the video, click that little bell so you never miss when we post a new video. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, mailbag questions, anything like that, drop them right down below in the comments. And if you're audio only, please leave us a 5-star review as it all really does help us out. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we will talk to you on Friday.